The parking garage beneath Hartwell Capitol Tower went dark at 11:47 on a Thursday night. Not gradually, not the slow dimming of a failing system. All at once, the kind of darkness that arrived with purpose, that had been planned for, that meant someone had cut the right wire in the right place at exactly the right moment. Diana Hartwell heard the pop of the transformer somewhere above her. She heard her two security guards reach for their radios. She heard the hollow roll of a janitor's cart from somewhere on the level above, a sound she had spent 14 months training herself not to react to in public, not to look toward, not to let her face change when she heard it. Then the guards went down. Not shot. Something quieter and faster than that, in the dark, before they could finish reaching. And a man stepped out from behind a white utility van as though he had been waiting there his entire life for this precise moment. "Mrs. Reed," he said softly. Not Miss Hartwell, not Madam Chair, not the name that appeared on the covers of business magazines and the letterhead of a company worth $4 billion. Mrs. Reed. Diana's hand closed around the chain at her throat, the chain that held a ring she had never worn in this building, in any meeting, at any event where the people who evaluated her daily were watching. The ring that belonged to the man pushing a mop on the 14th floor. The man who, before he was a janitor in gray coveralls with Reed stitched above the pocket, had spent 11 years doing things in places that didn't appear on any public map, for a unit whose name appeared in no official directory, bringing people home from situations that were supposed to be impossible. "Your husband will come," the man said, almost gently, as his associates moved toward her from both sides. "Men like him always do." Diana opened her mouth. Then she thought of Lily, 7 years old, home with Mrs. Chen next door, asleep under a quilt with a stuffed rabbit named Captain. She thought of Marcus in the corridor above her, pushing his cart past conference rooms where men in expensive suits had laughed at him without knowing what he was. She closed her mouth. She was going to need every breath for what came next. If you've ever wondered why the quietest person in the room sometimes turns out to be the most important, this story is for you. Subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. 14 months earlier, Marcus Reed had saved Diana Hartwell's life without asking who she was. She had been leaving a charity dinner at the Meridian Hotel on a wet October night, alone because she refused to appear dependent, because men on her board counted every soft edge they could use against her. She had been on her phone, arguing with a banker about leverage ratios on a pending acquisition, when a man came out of the shadow of a doorway moving too fast and too purposefully. Marcus stepped between them before Diana had finished processing what she was seeing. There was no dramatic speech, no movie version of heroism. He simply moved in a way that changed the geometry of the situation, that communicated to the man coming toward her, without a word spoken, that the calculation he had made 30 seconds ago was incorrect and needed to be revised immediately. The man revised it. He left. Marcus picked Diana's phone up from the wet sidewalk where she had dropped it and held it out to her with the same flat, unhurried expression he would have used handing her an umbrella. "You should watch the doorways," he said, "not the phone." She had disliked the rebuke. She had also, for the first time in years, been spoken to as a person in actual danger rather than as a symbol to be protected or managed or quietly undermined. She found him 3 days later. He worked at a fleet maintenance company on the south side, keeping delivery trucks running. His daughter Lily, 7 years old, missing a front tooth, wearing a purple sweater, was doing homework at a folding table in the waiting area because the after-school program had let out early. Lily looked up at Diana with the frank, assessing gaze of a child who had not yet learned to pretend she wasn't looking, and said, "Are you the lady from the sidewalk?" "I think so," Diana said. "Dad said you dropped your phone." "I did." Lily considered this. "I dropped my lunch once," she said. "It was sad." Diana laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere she didn't usually allow access to in professional contexts. Marcus looked up from the engine he was examining with the expression of a man who had not expected that sound to come from that person. Their courtship unfolded in small, careful pieces over the following months. Diana brought paperwork she could have handled at her office and pretended not to be visiting him. Marcus fixed a noise in her company car that any dealership could have addressed and pretended he hadn't driven 40 minutes to do it. Lily served as the bridge neither adult was willing to openly acknowledge they needed. She drew Diana pictures of buildings with windows shaped like stars. Diana sent back books, then coloring supplies, then eventually herself, sitting in the third row at a school concert, while Lily played a recorder solo with the focused intensity of someone performing at Carnegie Hall. Diana learned the outline of Marcus's life slowly, in pieces. He was a widower. His wife, Nora, had died of a sudden illness before Lily turned 3. He had served in the army, then in a unit attached to operations that didn't generate public paperwork. He described his service in geography and weather, dry heat, bad roads, long nights, the kind of silence that followed a phone call nobody wanted to receive. He woke at unfamiliar sounds. He always found exits before he found menus. He kept his back to walls in restaurants. Diana, who had spent her career among sophisticated people who were also dangerous in their particular ways, recognized discipline when she saw it. She took longer to understand its cost. They married at the county clerk's office on a Tuesday in February. Lily wore a dress she had chosen herself, navy blue with small white flowers, and held a bouquet of grocery store carnations with the gravity of someone performing an important ceremonial function. Marcus wore a dark suit. Diana wore a cream coat and no jewelry except the ring, which was simple and gold, and nothing like what the business press would have expected of her. Afterward, they ate breakfast at a diner where nobody knew Diana's face, and Lily declared, with maple syrup on her chin, that Diana was now family, but also kind of impressive, which was a different category. For approximately 2 hours, Diana believed that love might be less complicated than the life she had built around the absence of it. It became complicated before the marriage license was filed. Hartwell Capital was in the middle of the largest acquisition in its history, a network of regional medical centers that would double the company's portfolio. Diana's authority was under constant low-grade attack from a board that still spoke of her father as though leadership were a genetic trait that had somehow skipped a generation. Her uncle, Clifford Hartwell, remained on the board as chairman emeritus, publicly beloved, privately relentless in his quiet campaign to ensure Diana understood that she held her position on the board's sufferance. He had told her once, in the blunt way of men who believed frankness was a form of generosity, that shareholders were most comfortable with female executives who appeared married to the company itself. A secret marriage to a fleet mechanic with a classified military record, a 7-year-old daughter, and no financial profile that would satisfy anyone who went looking, that would be called impulsive. It would be called a vulnerability. It would be used. Marcus understood the argument faster than she expected, though his reasons were different. A name was a trail, he told her. A known family was a target. There were people from his previous work who would not care about Diana's money except as a mechanism. He had believed certain dangers were past. He was no longer certain. He asked for time, not permanent secrecy, just time, until he could be sure nothing from his old life had found its way to his new one. Diana agreed because agreement felt both practical and loving, which she would later understand were not always the same thing. They rented a modest house in a neighborhood 40 minutes from the lakefront building the press believed was her home. Marcus took a night custodial position inside Hartwell Capital Tower. Diana hated the idea with a specificity she couldn't fully articulate. He had more genuine intelligence than 3/4 of the consultants she paid to flatter her in conference rooms. Watching him accept a position pushing a mop through corridors where men who were his intellectual inferiors made decisions that affected thousands of people, it cost her something she didn't have a clean word for. Marcus only said, "People don't look at the man with the cart. That's the point." So their life divided into daylight and after hours. By day, Diana moved through marble lobbies and glass-walled boardrooms, fielding questions about debt structure and executive judgment. By night, Marcus moved through the same building in gray coveralls, pushing a cart down corridors where young analysts left coffee cups beside trash cans and laughed when he collected them. Where a vice president named Elliot Marsh stopped outside the executive suite one evening and asked loudly whether custodial staff were permitted to use the same elevators as leadership. Marcus said nothing. He waited for Elliot to pass. He continued polishing the brass handrail outside the boardroom until he could see the overhead lights reflected in it. Diana had been in her office with the door open. She heard every word. She did not come out. That failure stayed with her longer than anything Elliot Marsh ever said to her directly, because Marcus never mentioned it at home. He came back to their rented house after his shift, made coffee, listened to Lily explain the social dynamics of second grade with the attention most people reserved for important meetings, helped with homework, and said nothing about the corridor outside the executive suite. His silence made it worse. Not because it was angry silence. It was the silence of a man who had decided that certain things were not worth making larger than they already were, and that decision was somehow more difficult to sit with than any accusation. They negotiated Lily's life in the careful, imperfect way of two people who loved the same child and disagreed about almost everything surrounding that love. Marcus did not want Lily raised as an accessory to wealth. Diana did not want Lily standing in a lunch line counting coins. They compromised clumsily. Second-hand winter coats that fit properly. School field trips quietly funded. One keyboard that Diana bought after Lily played a hymn by ear on a church basement upright, and Diana understood, with the certainty of someone used to identifying real talent, that this was not a hobby. The hiding changed them in ways neither named directly. Diana began to speak of timing and optics as though their marriage were a press release waiting for a more favorable quarter. Marcus began to say less. He did not complain when she walked past him in the building corridors without acknowledgement. He did not flinch the one time she introduced him to an out-of-town board member who had wandered into the wrong hallway as one of our facilities team. That evening, in the kitchen of their rented house, Marcus washed a dish, set it in the rack, and said, "Knowing why something is necessary doesn't make it feel less like what it is." Lily, who was older than either of them wanted her to be in certain ways, had begun asking whether Diana was coming to school events as Diana or as my secret stepmom. The joke was light. The question underneath it was not. The trouble announced itself in small ways that Marcus didn't share with Diana immediately. A car appeared near Lily's school twice in 1 week, dark, no plates visible, gone before he could get close. An envelope arrived at their house with no return address containing a single photograph, the two of them on the courthouse steps the day they married. Someone had circled Lily's face in red. Marcus burned the envelope. Diana saw the ash mark in the sink. He told her enough to make her afraid and not enough to make her feel informed, which felt protective from the inside and controlling from the outside, and which she was not wrong to be angry about. Years before, his unit had dismantled a network that moved wealthy targets, kidnapping for ransom, operated through private airfields, shell companies, and compromised officials. Its architect, a man named Silas Vance, had disappeared after a raid in the Pacific Northwest. Marcus had believed him dead. Then came signals, names and sealed indictments, a former network operative found shot in a parking lot in Detroit, and now the photograph. "You should have told me," Diana said. Marcus looked at the doorway where Lily was visible through the gap, doing homework with headphones on. "I wanted one part of her life untouched," he said, "and one part of yours. That's not your decision to make alone. I know that now." The argument ran out of energy without resolving, the way the most important arguments between people who loved each other often did. At Hartwell Capital, Elliot Marsh had been constructing something. He praised Diana in meetings and undermined her in conversations afterward. He had noticed, months earlier, a half-second exchange between Diana and the night custodian near the service elevator, less than a look, more than nothing, and had filed it away with the patience of someone who built careers on reading what people believed they had successfully concealed. He brought in an outside security consultant named Warren Cole. Cole arrived with recommendations for new protocols. He was a big man who carried his weight on the balls of his feet, checked corners without turning his head, and had a mark on the inside of his left wrist, partly covered by a watch. Not military, not law enforcement, the kind of training that happened in places where documentation was a liability. During a meeting in which Cole presented his assessment, Marcus was cleaning the glass wall of the conference room on the other side. Cole paused mid-sentence, looked through the glass, and said, "Why is he standing there?" Elliot smiled. "Because someone has to clean up after the people who matter." Laughter moved around the table. Diana stared at the surface in front of her. She did not look at the glass. Marcus kept cleaning. His face gave the room nothing. The annual board gala took place on a Thursday in November. Diana wore a dark dress, her wedding ring on its chain beneath silk. Marcus was scheduled for the night shift. She had asked him not to come. He came anyway. Not as her husband, not as a guest, but as the man replacing trash liners in the corridor outside the ballroom, while donors moved through warm light and string music inside. Lily stayed with Mrs. Chen under protest. She called every corporate event that Diana attended Mom's fancy, difficult party. During dinner, a journalist asked Diana, at the table, in front of 8 other people, whether there was any truth to reports of a personal relationship with a company employee. The table quieted completely. Diana felt every face turned toward her. She felt, without looking, the presence of Marcus near the service door across the room. She could have ended it. She could have said, "Yes, his name is Marcus Reed. He is my husband. He is the most honest person I have ever been in a room with." Instead, she heard Clifford's voice in her memory. She thought of Lily's name in a comment section. She thought of the stock price and the acquisition. "My personal life is not relevant to this company's performance," she said evenly. The table accepted this. Marcus lowered his gaze for a fraction of a second and turned toward a spill near the service bar. Elliot followed him there. "There's something admirable," Elliot said, loudly enough for the nearest guests to hear, "about a man who knows exactly where he belongs." Marcus was crouching to address the spill. He didn't look up immediately. "And where is that?" he said. "Wherever the work is humble enough to match the man." Marcus looked up at him, not with anger, with the specific, patient attention of someone who has fully understood a thing and is deciding whether it merits a response. "The work doesn't determine the man," he said quietly. "The man determines how he does the work." Elliot's smile stayed in place but lost its ease. Diana had taken one step toward them before Clifford's hand found her elbow. "Not here," he murmured. She stopped. She stayed. Later, as the gala thinned, Marcus watched Warren Cole speak briefly into his collar and move toward the staff corridor with 2 men whose names were not on any approved list. He texted Diana immediately. "Don't use the lower garage. Take the lobby exit." Diana was standing beside Clifford and Elliot, still in their conversation about tomorrow's board call. She felt her phone vibrate. She saw the message. She thought of the half-told story about Silas Vance. She thought of the way Marcus had been managing her, instead of trusting her with the full truth. She didn't respond. When Warren Cole appeared 15 minutes later and said the lobby had become crowded with press, that the private garage would be faster and more discreet, Diana let herself be guided downstairs. By the time Marcus reached the service stairs, the emergency light at the bottom was already blinking red. He got one message from Diana, a single word: rain. It was the word from the night they met, the word she had laughed about once, saying she'd use it someday if she ever needed rescuing again, without wanting to be dramatic about it. Marcus dropped everything and ran. He moved through the building the way the building had never seen him move. Men who had walked past him for 14 months without registering his existence saw a blur cross the 14th floor corridor at a speed that didn't match the gray coveralls, that didn't match the cart, that didn't match anything they thought they knew about the man who cleaned the glass outside conference rooms. He took the stairs the way his body remembered from a different life that his mind had never fully let go of. In the garage, Diana had not been waiting. She had been counting voices, positions. The location of the generator near the north wall, the roll-up door facing the loading dock, the camera above the third support column with the dead angle she had identified in the first 30 seconds. She drove her elbow backward into the ribs of the man holding her arm, stamped her heel onto the foot of the man behind her, and nearly reached the emergency alarm column before a second man caught her from the side. She went down fighting. She always had. Silas Vance had aged, but not enough. Silver in his beard now, a burn scar pulling at one side of his jaw, but the same quality of attention in his pale eyes, unhurried, empty of urgency. The eyes of a man who had decided long ago that patience was the most efficient form of violence. "Your husband chose an excellent hiding place," he said, watching Diana with something that might have been appreciation. "The janitor in the building he built his life around protecting. Almost touching." Diana spat blood onto the concrete. She had bitten her cheek in the fall and looked at him steadily. "You don't know anything about him." "I know he'll come," Silas said. Men like Reed always mistake love for a door they have to walk through. Marcus came through the stairwell door as the van door slammed, 3 seconds too late. One man remained to cover the exit. He raised a weapon with professional calm. The security camera above Bay C7 recorded what the building's employees would watch in silence the following morning. The janitor closing the distance before the man finished his aim. The disarm. The sweep. The knee pressed to the center of his back, precise and final, while the weapon skidded under a parked vehicle. No wasted motion, no performance, no anger. Just the distilled efficiency of someone who had spent years in situations where the margin between the right movement and the wrong one was measured in fractions. Evelyn Park, Hartwell Capital's general counsel, had come down looking for Diana and stopped at the entrance to Bay C7. She had known Marcus as the employee who replaced light bulbs without submitting work orders, who had once found her lost earring and left it on her desk in a small paper envelope, who Elliot Marsh had publicly mocked while people who should have known better smiled at their shoes. She watched him stand from the man on the ground and turn, and she understood in that moment that she had spent 14 months seeing the wrong thing entirely. "Lock down the garage footage," Marcus said. He was breathing hard, but his voice was level. "Keep Elliot away from the security system. Call the police. Don't trust Warren Cole or anyone he brought in." "Who are you?" Evelyn said. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had been that question for a very long time. "Someone who needs to find his wife," he said. And then he was moving. He called Mrs. Chen first. Lily answered, her voice small and too awake for nearly midnight. "Daddy?" "Hey, Button, I need you to stay with Mrs. Chen. She's going to take you somewhere. You go with her, and you wait for my call." Silence. Then, "Is Diana okay?" He looked at his hand, Diana's ring on the broken chain he'd picked up from the garage floor. "She's alive," he said. "I'm going to bring her home." A breath, then, quietly, "You said we were done with scary things." "I was wrong to promise what I couldn't control," he said. "But I promise you this. You are not alone. And neither is she." He ended the call before his voice could become something that would frighten her more than the situation already had. In a maintenance room behind the loading dock, behind a rack of cleaning supplies, he opened a locked panel that no janitor had any professional reason to possess. Inside, a satellite phone, maps, a medical kit, cash, and a photograph of 6 people in front of a transport aircraft. He made a call. It connected on the second ring. "Tell me this isn't Vance," said the voice. "It's Vance." A pause. "What do you need?" Marcus gave him everything he had, the van, the route, the mark on the men's hands, Warren Cole's name and profile. "That mark was supposed to be gone." "Apparently not." "Then you know what he wants." Marcus looked at Diana's ring. "He wants me," he said. "He'll use her to get there." While Marcus worked, Elliot Marsh tried to turn a kidnapping into a career opportunity. By 2 in the morning, he had assembled enough directors on an emergency call to suggest that Diana's undisclosed personal situation represented a material fiduciary concern, that her judgment was compromised, that the board needed to consider continuity options. He used careful language. He looked appropriately grave. He looked like a man who believed the fire he was standing beside would warm him rather than consume him. Evelyn interrupted the call from the security office. She had the garage footage. She had access logs showing Warren Cole had disabled the cameras along the lower garage route 60 minutes before the gala ended. She had 3 payments from Elliot's discretionary consulting budget to a shell company that had paid Cole over the preceding 6 weeks. Elliot denied it in the rapid, precise way of a man whose denial had been prepared in advance and was now discovering it didn't fit the evidence. "I authorized a security stress test," he said, "a controlled assessment. What happened was not—" "Your controlled assessment," Evelyn said, with the quiet of someone who had decided accuracy was more useful than anger, "delivered our CEO to a professional criminal." Clifford Hartwell had said nothing for several minutes. He was looking at a still from the garage footage that Evelyn had sent him. Marcus, in gray coveralls, standing over an unconscious man with Diana's broken chain in his fist. "Mr. Marsh," Clifford said, finally, in the level voice that was the Hartwell family's most reliable instrument of authority. "You will remain in the building until law enforcement arrives." The call ended. Clifford sat alone with the image on his screen. He had spent 3 years warning Diana about optics and shareholder sentiment. He had been so certain that perception was the architecture of power that he had failed to understand what he was actually asking his niece to build her life around. He looked at the man in the gray coveralls. He understood, for the first time, what Diana had been carrying, and how little of it had ever had anything to do with shame. Silas held Diana in a cold storage facility near the river. She had been assessing the space from the moment they brought her in. 6 voices inside, generator near the northeast wall, roll-up door facing water, improvised cameras. Her wrists were secured to a chair, but the bolt beneath the seat had a cracked thread that she found with her fingers in the first 10 minutes. She worked on it slowly, continuously, while Silas explained, in the patient tone of someone settling an old account, what Marcus had cost him. "Your husband made me ordinary," Silas said finally. "He took the fear away. That's what I'll never forgive." Diana, bruised and exhausted, looked at him steadily. "That bothers you more than the people you hurt," she said. "Not the families, not the children. You're angry because he made you look like what you are." Silas studied her. "And you made him disappear," he said. "Don't claim moral standing from a chair you built on his silence." That landed. She let it land, because it was true. She thought of every corridor she had walked past him without acknowledgement, every event she had attended without him. Every time Lily had asked when things were going to be different, and Diana had said soon, and let soon accumulate into a distance with its own weight. She had told herself she was protecting the company, protecting Lily, protecting Marcus. But protection had become convenient. It had spared her from choosing. Silas placed her phone on the crate. "Call him," he said. "Tell him to come alone." Diana looked at the phone. She thought of Marcus hearing her voice and walking toward whatever Silas had arranged at the end of it. She thought of Lily in whatever safe place Marcus had sent her. She let her shoulders drop. She let Silas read it as surrender. Her fingers kept working at the bolt. Marcus reached the facility before dawn. Through a borrowed earpiece, a former colleague fed him building plans and scanner traffic. He crouched behind pallets and mapped what he could see: the guard at the loading bay, the camera above it, the blind spot near the drainage pipe, the tire tracks in the thin new snow. He felt the part of himself that he had spent 4 years trying to keep at a controlled distance come fully awake. He did not enjoy the feeling. That was what people like Elliot Marsh would never understand about a man who was capable of what Marcus was capable of, that heeding the necessity of it was not weakness. It was the only thing that kept the capability from becoming the whole of a person. He disabled the first guard without sound. He cut power to one camera. He entered through a side door.
Warren Cole was waiting inside with a pistol. "All that time with a mop," Cole said. "They really had no idea." Marcus kept walking toward him.
"You helped deliver my wife to a criminal because a vice president wanted a promotion," he said. Cole raised the pistol. Marcus threw a steel coupling that caught Cole's wrist before the aim could settle, then crossed the distance before Cole had finished processing the impact. The fight lasted less than 40 seconds. Cole ended up zip-tied to a support pipe. Marcus was already moving toward the main floor. Silas called directly. "Enter through the front," he said. "Hands visible. Alone." "Let me hear her first." Silas turned the phone. Diana's voice came through. Marcus heard the control in it, the specific effort she made to sound steady, and loved her with an acuteness that surprised him even now. "Marcus," she said. Every person in that warehouse who was listening went still at the way she said his name. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have—" "Not now," he said, gently, the voice he used when Lily woke from nightmares. "Listen to me." A pause. "I know you've been working on whatever is holding you. Keep working. Give me 90 seconds. A beat of silence. "I hear you," she said. She said it quietly, and in those 3 words was the full weight of everything they had been building and hiding and protecting and failing and trying again across 14 months. He triggered the sprinkler line near the loading bay. Freezing water came down in a metallic roar. Guards moved. Someone shouted. In the noise, Diana wrenched her hand free, grabbed the crate edge, and drove her shoulder into the generator switch. Half the warehouse went dark. Marcus dropped from the catwalk into the main floor, moved through the darkness by sound and memory, found Diana's arm, and pulled her behind the forklift as the room came apart around them. "Lily?" she gasped. "Safe, Mrs. Chen." She exhaled, a single, complete breath, releasing something held for hours. "I counted 5 remaining plus Silas," she said. "Cole?" "Secured." "Good." A beat. "Don't trade yourself." "I wasn't planning to." "I know you're planning, face," she said. "I'm serious." He almost smiled. Then Silas's voice filled the darkness. "Reed." He had stopped using the civilian name, gone back to the unit name, the name from the files, the name from the raid that had unraveled his operation. "You never could leave people behind." Marcus pressed Diana's ring into her palm. "When you hear sirens close, water door," he said. "Marcus." 90 seconds, he said. "Trust me." "I do," she said, no hesitation. He moved into the dark. What followed was later described by the first 2 officers to enter as unlike anything either had encountered in a combined 31 years. Not because of the violence, though there was violence, but because of the quality of control within it. The economy. The absence of anything wasted or incidental. The man who had been cleaning floors and replacing light bulbs for 14 months, moving through a warehouse full of armed men with the systematic, unhurried capability of someone who had done this before in harder conditions and was simply doing it again. Silas was last. He caught Diana as she moved toward the water door, one arm across her throat, knife in his other hand, the specific position of a man who had done this before and was prepared for the obvious response. Diana drove the back of her head into his chin. His grip broke. Marcus closed the distance. The knife caught his forearm on the way in, a cut he registered without stopping for. He took Silas down onto the dock boards and held him there, breathing hard, looking at him. "Go on," Silas said through broken breath. "Finish it properly." Marcus held the position. He thought of Lily, wherever Mrs. Chen had taken her, believing her father came home because that was what good men chose to do. He thought of Diana watching him. He thought of the version of himself that Lily was learning to believe in. He took a restraint from his pocket and secured Silas's wrists. "My daughter has to live with what I do," he said quietly. "So do I."
The sirens arrived 2 minutes later. Diana stood in front of the body cameras, holding her husband upright and saying the same thing over and over to every officer who came through the door. "His name is Marcus Reed. He is my husband. Please help him." By noon the following day, the city knew everything. News anchors presented it with grave expressions that didn't fully conceal their enjoyment.
Online commentary divided into people angry at Diana, people moved by Marcus, people focused on Elliot Marsh's departure from the building in handcuffs, and people primarily concerned with whether Lily was all right. Lily was all right. She was at Mrs. Chen's, eating cereal, watching her tablet. She texted Marcus one message while he was being stitched in the emergency room. "You said 90 seconds. It was longer." He wrote back, "I'll work on my timing." She sent a single eye roll emoji. Diana looked at the exchange over his shoulder in the hospital room and laughed, the real kind, from somewhere unguarded. The emergency board meeting convened 2 days later. Diana had 2 cracked ribs and a bruised cheekbone, and she walked into the boardroom beside Marcus, who was in borrowed dress clothes and clearly uncomfortable in them. Lily came too, navy sweater, one hand in Marcus's, the other wrapped around a small, smooth stone she'd been keeping in her coat pocket since the night it happened. "I want to see the room where they thought Dad didn't matter," Lily had said. No adult could construct an argument sufficient to stop her. Evelyn presented the evidence with precise, clean efficiency. The payments, the camera outages, the communications between Elliot and Cole, the recorded admission of a manufactured crisis intended to weaken Diana's leadership position. A director named Henry cleared his throat. "The criminal matters are clear," he said, "but shareholders will still raise questions about an undisclosed marriage to a subordinate employee. The optics," Diana said. She was tired of the careful architecture of managed language. Her ribs hurt. Marcus was beside her, with his bandaged arm resting on the table, where every person in this room could see it. Lily was against the wall, watching with the direct, unblinking gaze she used when she was learning something she intended to keep. "I hid my marriage," Diana said, "because I believed this room would reduce a good man to his job title. I thought you would call it a lapse in judgment because he wore a custodial badge instead of a board credential. I was right about some of you." She looked at Marcus. "My husband took a night job in this building to be near me, while the danger he couldn't yet name was still unclear. He treated everyone here more honestly than most of them treated him. He noticed security failures no one on the executive team flagged. He fixed things no one thanked him for. He walked people to their cars when they were nervous and never asked for acknowledgement. He held this building together in ways none of you saw." Her voice broke slightly on the next words. She let it. "And I let silence answer when I should have used my voice. Not because of the company, because I was afraid of this room. That was my failure, not the marriage, the silence." Against the wall, Lily had her jaw set in the precise expression she wore when she was determined not to cry in front of people she didn't trust. Clifford spoke without the authority that usually surrounded him. "I taught my niece to survive rooms like this one," he said. "I should have taught her which ones weren't worth surviving in." He looked at Marcus. "We measured the wrong things. That is on this board, and on me." The vote was not close. Diana remained. Elliot's termination was immediate and referred to federal investigators. Evelyn was given independent authority to rebuild the company's security and ethics infrastructure. When the meeting ended, Diana stood with Marcus's hand in hers, and they walked out through the hallway where he had polished brass railings at midnight, while analysts left cups for him to collect. Lily walked on his other side. For the first time in that building, they moved like what they were. A week later, Diana held a press conference in the lobby beneath the chandelier. Marcus would have preferred any available alternative. Lily told him he looked like a man trying to solve a math problem in a language he didn't speak, which he admitted was accurate. Diana gave him the choice until the final minute. He owed no camera his history, no reporter his service record, no gossip columnist a tidy narrative. He owed nobody in that lobby anything. He stood beside her anyway. Because marriage was not one person in the light while the other waited in the shadow. He had learned things across 14 months about the particular courage it took to let someone see you completely. And he understood that this was part of it. Diana wore her ring openly. She said only that Marcus had served in rescue and protection operations, that he had chosen ordinary work afterward because ordinary work was honorable, and that she had allowed fear of other people's judgment to silence the truth of who they were to each other. A reporter asked if she had been embarrassed by his job. Diana looked at Marcus. She looked at Lily, standing near Evelyn at the back. "I was embarrassed by my own cowardice," she said. "There is no shame in cleaning a floor, or repairing a door, or raising a child, or doing work that nobody applauds. The shame belongs to people who mistake another person's humility for permission to humiliate them." When the microphone came to Marcus, he said one sentence. "I want my daughter to grow up in a world where people are measured by what they carry for others, not by what's printed on their badge." It played on every station that night. He disliked this intensely. Lily saved the clip and watched it 11 times. Life afterward was not simple. It was honest, which turned out to be harder and more valuable. Silas Vance was indicted on multiple counts. Cole cooperated quickly. Elliot, stripped of the composure that had always been his primary instrument, was discovered to be considerably less substantial than he had appeared. Hartwell Capital completed the hospital acquisition under stricter oversight. Evelyn rebuilt the security division and instituted a requirement that every executive spend 1 day a month working alongside frontline staff, not as theater, but as education. Clifford came to dinner one Sunday evening at their actual house, the one with crayon drawings on the cabinet doors and the keyboard in the corner and the scratched kitchen table where Lily did homework. Lily answered the door, looked at him and said, "Are you going to be nice or not?" Clifford considered this with genuine seriousness. "I'm going to try," he said. He was not naturally good at it. He tried anyway. He asked Lily about the keyboard and listened to her explain the chord she was working on with more patience than Diana had ever witnessed him apply to a board presentation. Before he left, he stood in the kitchen while Marcus was out of earshot. "I told you to protect the company," he said to Diana. "I should have told you to protect what actually mattered." Diana looked toward the living room, where Marcus was helping Lily with the chord progression, his hand over hers on the keys. "I knew what mattered," she said. "I just wasn't brave enough." Clifford was quiet for a moment. "You are now," he said. Marcus never became a public figure, despite considerable pressure in that direction. He declined the streaming interview, the book proposal, the executive security title, the speaking tour. He accepted instead a quiet advisory role, training building staff on crisis readiness, consulting on facility security, working with Evelyn on a workplace dignity initiative that several executives hated and several others quietly credited with changing how they understood their work. He kept his old custodial badge in a drawer, alongside Lily's baby teeth, Nora's recipe cards, and the unit photograph taken in front of a transport aircraft in a place he had not spoken the name of aloud in years. Not as a wound, he told Diana once when she asked about it. As a witness. On the first anniversary of the night in the garage, they came back to the 14th floor after the building emptied. Snow against the windows, the city softened by it. The corridor was quiet, the brass rail polished, the service closet freshly painted. Diana stood where she had once walked past him without acknowledgement. "I used to tell myself I was protecting everything by keeping quiet," she said. "I used to tell myself I was keeping watch," Marcus said, "not needing anything." She looked at him. What was it actually? He thought about it honestly, the way he thought about most things. "A place where we were both very lonely," he said. She took his hand. "I'm sorry I made you stand here as less than you are. I'm sorry I asked you to love someone with locked doors and called it protection." A pause. The city outside, muffled by snow. "We were very convincing idiots," she said. "Professional level," he agreed. They laughed quietly, and the sound moved down the empty corridor like something being set free. Months later, at an employee gathering in the same ballroom where Elliot had once told Marcus that a building belonged to the people who mattered, Diana stepped to the microphone without notes. She looked out over the room. Mechanics, analysts, nurses from the newly acquired hospitals, custodians, directors, cafeteria staff, security officers, clerks, the full actual shape of the organization she had been running for years without fully seeing it. "Most of you know Marcus Reed by now," she said. "Some of you knew him before you understood who he was to me. I want to introduce him properly, not as a headline, not as a symbol, not as the man who saved my life, though he did." She looked at him. "This is my husband." The room held still for one breath. Then applause, not the practiced kind, not the kind performed for an audience, something warmer and less organized, the sound of a room receiving something it hadn't expected to feel. Lily, seated near Evelyn, applauded until her palms hurt and did not care who noticed. Marcus stood beside Diana and received it without lowering his head, which she knew was the hardest thing she had ever asked of him, harder than the warehouse, harder than the garage, harder than 14 months of gray coveralls in corridors where men who should have known better laughed at what they thought they were seeing.
He had been seen before she met him, by Lily, by Nora before that, by people he had carried through darkness in places that didn't appear on maps. He had not needed a ballroom to confirm what he was, but Lily was in the third row, and some things deserved to be said in daylight, in rooms where the people who had looked in the wrong direction could finally correct their vision. Diana did not look away from him when the room applauded. She had spent years believing that power meant needing nothing and no one. Power had not held her in the garage. Status had not come for her along the river. Reputation had not sat with Lily on the edge of the bed at midnight and promised that everything was going to be all right. The man beside her had done those things. He had done them quietly, without waiting to be seen, without conditions, in gray coveralls in a building where people left cups for him to collect. Dignity did not wait for a spotlight to find it. It was there all along. The people who carried the most are often the ones nobody thinks to notice. Look around you. You probably know someone like Marcus. Let them know they're seen. Subscribe. There are more stories like this one waiting, and they deserve to be heard.